My name is Patrick. I'm an alcoholic. And, I also did a lot of drugs, but I identify as an alcoholic. So I guess what I'm going to do is spend the next 40 minutes, I've been told, telling you my life story and how I got sober and how I got to Oasis. So I'll start at the beginning. I was born August 2nd, 1953, in a little one-room doctor's office called the Bassinet Hospital in Inglewood, California, because my dad had taken the money to have me born and had his 51 Mercury chopped or topped or whatever you want to call it, because he was into cars. So I was basically born sort of like a destitute baby. And my mom was 18 and he was 19, and they were kind of like a young lovers and this and that. They were really cool people, but they didn't stay married very long. And by the time I was 5, my mom had remarried and then remarried again. So my earliest recollections were living with my grandmother, traveling around, and we had a big house, and there was a lot of family members there. And I had a pretty good childhood, no complaints. Spent a lot of time at the racetrack because my uncle was a jockey. So I would wake up in the morning when I was like 4 or 5 years old. He'd dress me up in my little cowboy boots, and I'd go off to Hollywood Park and watch the horses exercise. And to this day, I still ride horses, and I like horses, and it was kind of cool. My earliest memories were nice. My mom got remarried, my sister was born, and Michelle, and she's a really good person. She's been here a couple times, people know her, and she's one of my biggest supporters of sobriety. When in the 2nd grade, my mom knew a woman who was an agent for TV kids and movies, and she thought that my sister was really cute, and I just kind of went along for the ride that day, and they took some pictures of her, and they took some pictures of me. My sister never did work, and I started working a lot. In the 2nd grade, I got a movie, a commercial, and a series called General Hospital in 1962. That's obviously still on today, some almost 50 years later. Actually, 50 years later. It was weird. That was kind of the beginning of a strange chain of events for me, because going from school, public school, to private tutoring on the set with all adults, you kind of got a strange dynamic of reality, a sense of reality. You were back and forth between the two, and I mean, I didn't really want for anything. It was a lot of fun, and I knew it was kind of special, but at the same time, you got treated differently by the kids back in public school, and then you also got treated differently at home because you were taking your mom away from the other kids, and you're working a lot. It was a strange deal. It's kind of a make-believe world. You drive up there, and you go behind the studio gates, you do your business, and you come home. And luckily, I lived about 30 miles away from the studios, and I kept somewhat of a normal life, as normal as one could expect. Public school went on, and then I did a lot more work, but the main thing happened when I was living in Illinois. I went back to my grandma. My grandma was an antique dealer, and I would drive all across the country with her. She had this 59 pink Cadillac. I remember it so vividly. Big fins, and she was only about 4'10". And we would drive all over the country looking for antiques. And I got a chance to see the American, the countryside. I saw all the national parks, all the really neat stuff that we have to offer in this country, and I'm still a big fan of Americana to this day. So when I was living in this little town in Illinois with her, I was in the 5th grade, and I went to a parochial school, because my mom at that time was trying to remarry a guy who was a Roman Catholic, and he was a baseball player. So he was playing for the Angels back then, and I was living in the Midwest, and I flew out for an interview for this show called The Munsters. And at that time, nobody knew what it was. It was just a crazy, interesting sitcom about some monsters living next door to Anybody USA. And nobody really thought it was going to be much of a hit, but it turned out to be really popular. And the character, Eddie Munster and the Herman Munster and the whole family became pretty successful and pretty famous. And I was only like 11 years old at the time. So what I did is at that time, I'd worked a lot, so by the time the Munsters came along, I had done a lot of work, and this particular show really kind of catapulted me to kid stardom with a few other kids, like the kid from Lost in Space, Billy Mooney, and Ronnie Howard, and the kids from My Three Sons, and there was like 10 or 15 of us running around back then, because there weren't that many successful kid actors. Not like today, there's a zillion of them because there's so many more channels. And you got to remember, at that time, television was just 3 channels. Prime time started at 7:30. Everybody was having TV trays and TV dinners, and they all would sit down in front of the television set. So it was really a lot of impact if you were on TV at that time, a lot more so than there is today. When the show was over, I left Illinois and moved to Los Angeles, and I lived with my uncle. Didn't have much of a family unit then because my mom was living in Washington, D.C. because he had been traded to the Washington Senators by that time. So I was living with my uncle. We hired a woman to take me to work. and I would fly back to Washington, D.C. on the weekends. And this is an 11-year-old kid, so this is like a very unusual lifestyle for a young guy. But I loved it because the weekends were with my dad at the ballpark, and then the weekdays I'm working in this TV show with some really nice people. But it was taking its toll on me mentally because I wasn't around other kids, and I grew up really fast. And I can remember after that time I started doing some guest starring roles, and the one I remember the most was an Adam 12 when I was 15 years old. And I actually played a kid that was getting caught by the cops for slashing their tires, and it was just really kind of ironic because I was just getting ready to get in trouble. Anyway, so on television, I kind of jumped the gun a little bit, and I remember that it was this 1968, summer, it was the end of 68, early 69. All I could think about was Woodstock and watching the concerts and thinking about Jimi Hendrix and all the music that I liked, and the Beatles had come on the Munster set, and I didn't see them that day, and one thing led to another, and all I wanted to do was get high. Seeing all these really cool people smoking pot and dropping acid, and I had done a movie in San Francisco a couple years earlier called The Phantom Toll Booth, and we went to Haight-Ashbury and saw all the hippies and the Grateful Dead and just psychedelics and peace and love, and the Vietnam War was. It was really a strange time to be alive. I mean, the '60s. I'm 58 years old, so I was 7 to 17 in the '60s, and growing up fast and living an unusual lifestyle, somewhat privileged. But I never thought I was privileged because I was working. My mom had a pretty good deal going because she didn't have to answer to any men because I was paying the bills, and I bought the house, and she was a really neat person, but she didn't see the enabling things that were happening to me, and she just figured I was smart enough or strong enough to weather whatever came my way.